can go skydiving. I can buy guns. I can buy alcohol. Like, can I just get myself a gallon of raw milk? And if I die, that's on me.
Yeah.
And like, the answer was no. You can't do that.
It's taboo. It's like trying to do black market deals, honestly. Sometimes that's what it feels like.
Kassie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for coming in today. We've already been talking some wild trash. I'm so happy to have this conversation with you.
I'm happy to be here.
So you are Lazy SP Ranch. You guys specialize in raw milk, which you wouldn't know this, but like coming from California, as I did, raw milk is the thing of like legend, right? Like there are tons of stories. I remember reading them, even through my 20s of like these small like co-ops and raw milk clubs getting prosecuted, getting jailed. You see people just saying, hey, look, I would like raw milk. Like I'm an American. I understand, like make me sign a waiver. I can go skydiving. I can buy guns. I can buy alcohol. Like, can I just get myself a gallon of raw milk? And if I die, that's on me. And like the answer was no. You can't do that.
It's taboo. It's like trying to do black market deals, honestly. Sometimes that's what it feels like.
Right. But we have space here in the state of Idaho for you to legally and happily create a business around raw milk from cows and sell it to people. That's a thing.
Yeah, it is.
God bless it.
So funny thing is that we are actually not as heavily regulated as the big time dairies. So there is actually more restrictions around big time dairies than there is raw milk. I don't know if that's like them trying to see if we can screw up with raw milk or if it's just because our regulations for me to be able to have my permit it's a yearly thing where I have to have my animals, bangs vaccinations, which is a lot of times is a metal tag in the ear or it's a button in the ear that number is specifically for that cow.
Okay.
So it follows her throughout her entire life, whether she stays here in Idaho or she transports across state. So it's basically like a social security number for a cow. So I have to have my cows banks vaccinated before a year old. It's between 4 months and a year old by a vet. A licensed vet is the only one that's allowed to be able to do a banks vaccination.
And what's involved in the bangs vaccination?
So it is to prevent for brucellosis.
Okay.
Which can be contracted in the milk, which we can get, along with also tuberculosis. So my cows are tested yearly for tuberculosis and brucellosis. Brucellosis tests involve doing a blood draw underneath so when we do blood draws, you actually lift up the tail of the cow and there's a major vein and you basically just poke the vein and that's where you actually get your blood draw from. I know it sounds like
the cows love that. I'm sure they love that.
Oh, they do.
That's not as weird as how you artificially inseminate cows, right?
Which I also do.
That also involves the tail getting raised up. I saw this on Micro Dirty Jobs.
Yes.
Yeah, good times.
Yeah, I actually took an AI course last year in March. That was 3 days of my arm being elbow deep in various Holsteins that at a dairy out in Marcy.
Okay. We'll put a pin in that.
Yes.
Anyway, so you have to do an annual blood draw.
Yes. So annual blood draw for the brucellosis that they have to run. The test takes, I think, about 5 days. They have to obviously ship it off. It's labeled with the cow's banks vaccination tag. And then the other one is a TB, which is honestly just like it's like a little prick on the bottom side of the tail. So they have to do that test by a vet again. And then in 72 hours, they have to do an examination. Basically, all it is lifting the tail, making sure there's not a reaction, calling it good. So that is the requirements of the ISDA, so Idaho State Department of Agriculture, to be able to sell raw milk in the state of Idaho. So you have to abide by those, and that is the cow side of it. The other side is the labels. We have to have certain specific labels of what we're selling. So the labels have to have what the product is. So it can either be raw milk, yogurt, raw butter, stuff like that. So it just basically has to say what it is. And then it has to go to what the quantity of it is. So like say if it's butter, you have to say like it's a half a pound or, a pound of butter. Same thing with the milk, half a gallon, a gallon. And then from there has to be in 10 point of a warning on it saying that you are aware you are consuming raw milk that is not being processed. It's kind of like signing your life away, honestly. When you take up a gallon of milk and it's raw milk, you're basically seeing on there that it has a warning label on it saying it is raw milk.
Right.
So, and then of course, the other thing is you have to have your, the name of where it comes from, which is where I came up with the Lazy SP Ranch. And then the other thing, you can either have your address where the cow is residing, or you can have your actual permit number. I actually have my address, and the reason for that is, one, I'm not ashamed if someone wants to come and see my practices. I'm not going to hide anything when it comes to...
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com. So if I buy a gallon of your milk, I can literally find out the address where the cow lives and just roll. I mean, you wouldn't want me to, but I just
we have cameras for a reason, but yes.
Roll up and be like, hey, this came from cow blah, blah, blah. Can I see the cow? And you're like, oh yeah, come on. Yeah. Like here it is. And this is I'm cows.
Oh yeah, they all have names. They all have personalized tags too, so we can tell all of them apart.
Hell yeah, man. Okay.
Right. But yeah, so that is the requirement, is to either have the address where the cow is lives and is collected. And then, or the permit number. And when I started making my labels, I obviously didn't have a permit number because I was just getting started with it. So I was just like, you know what? I'm okay putting my address. If someone wants to come and see how my cows live, how my cows are taken care of, I'm more than happy to show that. I'm not going to hide anything, because I want that openness of people asking questions like, what does the cow eat? How does the cow sleep? Everything like that. I want people to ask those, because I feel like if people are more involved with how they know their food comes, then they're more likely to inform themselves of other things, of, gardening or meat, or, buy a couple of chickens and have chickens for eggs. I feel like that is what we're kind of lacking a lot of times nowadays, is people don't understand. I mean, we did ag day at my kids' school one day where I actually brought 2 of my cows. And most of them understood what milk makes. Milk makes cheese, milk makes whipped cream, it makes ice cream. One of the things that they did was they were doing strawberry shortcakes and they had whipped cream on top of it. And so I was using that as like a reference of, Clover here, she makes your whipped cream. And some of the kids would look at me going, I didn't know whipped cream's made out of milk. And I go, oh yeah, milk makes cheeses, it makes yogurt, it even makes ice cream. And I have actually had kids ask me if cows make chocolate milk, because they're Jerseys, so they're brown. So they're like, oh, so they have chocolate. No, that's... And strawberry milk is not come from cows either. And if it's strawberry milk, it's not a good cow. So but trying to inform little kids, but even adults too, of the husbandry that we do with our cows. I mean, I'm open book with it. I want people to know. I want people to learn.
Okay, here's a question for you. It may not be one that you feel comfortable answering, but when I remember being in elementary school, and I think it was like 3rd grade, and they brought this like semi by in like the parking lot, and they had a cow in it, and like we did get to see the cow get milked slightly, but that was the end of my exposure to anything having to do with animals. And again, it was like 2nd or 3rd grade. It's ridiculous. But beyond that, I always heard, kind of as a cultural sentiment, that like raw milk is this dangerous thing. But it used to be that that's all people had from cows. Like cows didn't become popular thousands and thousands of years ago, or goats or things like that, because we had pasteurization systems. Like the pasteurization system and the requirement of pasteurization is really something far newer, right? Do you happen to know like the history and what drove people to this mass pasteurization to the point where, like for instance, I used to buy a lot of stuff for my SAT students, like snacks and stuff. And one of them was this chocolate milk from Costco in these little cartons. You didn't even have to refrigerate it. Like, it'll be room temperature. Like, there's nothing alive. Like, that is dead. It is just like, it is like a Coke. You can consume it warm. It doesn't matter. Like, it's milk only in name.
Yeah. So pasteurization was originally, it came around because of the tuberculosis. Once people started realizing that cows carried tuberculosis and that's how it was spread to people, they started doing the pasteurization process, which pasteurization it is good and it is bad. The good is because you do get rid of a lot of those pathogens that can make you sick. But on the other side, and this is where everybody is so controversial, raw milk has good bacteria in it. It's kind of like with yogurt. Yogurt has probiotics, and they also have, they have all the good stuff basically in it to help your digestive system. Raw milk also does have good bacteria in it. But pasteurization kills all of it. It kills the good, the bad. So basically you have what a lot of people call dead milk. And what pasteurization does is you take the milk and you heat it up to, there's two different ways actually. You can heat it up to 180, I believe. And once it reaches that, then you rapidly cool it back down to, I think, about 40 degrees. And when that happens, it basically neuralizes everything. It doesn't, so it's basically just milk. The other one, I think, which is the ultra pasteurization, that one actually brings it up, I think, to 230 and then rapidly cools it back down to 40 degrees. And again, pasteurization it gets rid of everything in the milk. And it actually decreases the nutritional value of it because, believe it or not, whole milk that is in the stores is actually not whole milk. It is, they can label it as whole milk because it is basically the highest percentage that they can get away with of putting the fat back into the milk. So all milk that is in the stores like Walmart, Ridley's here is homogenized. So there's two things. So pasteurization is the killing of the bacteria, making it safe. Homogenization is where they basically take all of the buttercream and all of the fat off of the milk and they put it back into the milk in certain percentages. So skim milk is basically the milk without any of the fat added back.
Sure.
Whole milk in the stores is actually 4%. So it's actually not a full fat milk. So it's not actually, it's not really whole milk.
What percentage is actual whole milk in the absence of homogenization?
It varies.
Okay.
It does.
Right.
Yeah. It does vary between your Holsteins, because Holsteins, between the breeds, they produce the most amount of milk. I mean, you can get cows that produce about 20 gallons a day. Wow. Jerseys, Guernseys, Brown Swiss, those ones are like your cream producers. Candy, my one girl, she produces a lot of cream. And again, that also even varies between the bloodlines too, because I have Candy and Clover that they're same age, came from the same dairy. Clover at her peak produces about 9 gallons a day, which is a lot for a Jersey. Candy will produce about 5 gallons at peak, which is 90 days for a cow. That's basically as high as they'll go, and then they'll start staggering off.
And then you need to induce pregnancy again to get them producing.
Yes. So the only way to really get milk is a cow has to have a calf. Some people who homestead, they'll push that out. I mean, they can have cows up until, oh my gosh, I've seen people do 2 years of milking on the same lactation. So what lactation is the time between freshening, which is what we consider them calving. So we call it fresh or freshening, up until their dry off period. And normally what we do, a dry off period, is we give the cow a break so that she's not straining her body with producing milk. We let her just have, some people do 3 months, some people do 2 months to be able to relax and let their body kind of heal before they have another calf. And that way they can also start their build-up of their colostrum for the next calf. So that's basically... So
you give her a time where it's like, listen, we're not going to ask anything from you. You eat, you relax, you recover. We're going on another bike race in 3 months. But
pretty much, yeah.
It's going to be taxing. It's going to be hard, but like chill out for right now.
Yeah, and every dairy does that. They don't... There's a misconception across, the world that cows, when they're in milk, they are milking all the time. No, they're not. They're not milking all the time. They have they have to have dry off periods in order to be able to produce colostrum for the next calf.
Gotcha.
So whether it's me who I do my raw milk, or it's, you know, the biggest dairy that's in Idaho, or even someone who just has 1 or 2 cows that they do milk for themselves, they have dry off periods.
So essentially you have the homogenization process so that they can add back in very specific amounts of fat and whatnot in order to have consistency through batches
the
of
gallons.
milk.
Yep.
Because in reality, there is no consistency through the actual animal. Like
Nope.
some will produce more, some will produce less, some will produce more and less depending on what time,
Depending on the day. And,
between the fresh and the peak. So you have a lot of different factors that go into this. So the industrial dairy industry essentially said, okay, look, let's separate out all these Lego pieces and then put the exact piece back in that you want. But that's far from the just giant bin of random Legos and whatnot that I don't know why I went to a Lego analogy, but it just seemed right. But the point is, so what you're selling then is not like, hey, I'm going to separate out all this. It's like if you get a half gallon or a gallon from this cow at this location, you're getting a half gallon or gallon of what this animal produced on this day.
Yep. Everything that I do is all labeled. I do, on the label, it is the day it was collected. So that way everybody, and most raw milk lasts between 10 and 14 days. And the funny thing is that this is also another controversy that people bring up. People say that store-bought milk will go bad. It molds, right? If you leave a jug in for 3 months or so, and it's going to smell horrible. If raw milk is processed and treated properly and put into clean containers and not contaminated.
And by processing, you don't mean pasteurization. You mean literally it's collected properly, put into a clean container.
Yep. Okay. The cow is completely sanitized. Right. The equipment, everything is sanitized. And it is put into a sanitized jar or jug, which is what I use.
Sure.
The milk will not mold. It ferments. So raw milk that has actually been treated properly, handled properly, it actually ferments. And what happens with that is it's kind of like a science experiment. And yes, I've had a couple of jars where I've done that. It separates the whey naturally in the milk, and it separates the actual milk itself and the butter fat. So you'll actually get all of that separation in the jar, and you'll see like all of the whey set, which is really cool because everybody is like, whey protein, not realizing where it actually come from. But yeah, it all separates into the jar itself. So as long as everything is handled properly, it won't mold. It ferments. And that's weird saying about milk, but it's true.
So do you get like an actual alcohol content if you leave it in there for like 3 or 4 months? No,
it's not really an alcohol. It's just the what I want to say, like the consistency of the milk changes.
Interesting.
So like I said, the butter fat separates from itself.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's basically, I mean, because I guess it's not really fermentation, because now I think about it, fermentation is like for alcohol.
Yeah. But it separates and then just congeals into something else.
That's basically what it does. Yeah. But it doesn't mold. It will not mold.
Okay. And if I may, getting back to the introduction of the pasteurization process.
Yes.
So this is something that happened like the early 20th century.
I think the pasteurization started, oh my gosh, I'm trying to remember my history. I think I want to say it was back in the early 1900s or the late 1800s.
Okay, great.
Basically where they would start kind of cooking the milk before they would use it. Yeah.
Okay. And the initial impetus is like, hey, we need to kill tuberculosis, right? Mm-hmm. Because we had sanitariums, we had like tuberculosis was a real problem.
Yes.
Like, I mean, and it would be again today were we to start getting runs of tuberculosis. Like, I actually have a good friend who randomly got tuberculosis. She didn't know she was talking to her doctor about it. She was runner and, tracked her runs and she was like, I don't know what's going on. Like I've lost, it was taking her instead of like 7.5 to 8 minutes per mile, it was taking her like 9.5 minute miles.
Okay.
And she was like, what's going on? Like she hadn't gained weight. She was being consistent. She was like, I literally can't. And her lungs just all of a sudden weren't working the right way. And they're like, you have tuberculosis. She was not drinking raw milk or anything. They're like, you can get it from the soil or something. Yeah. But like, these are real diseases that we, needed to ward off. But anyway, so they started doing this in order to avoid tuberculosis or stop the transmission of tuberculosis. Got it. But at what point did they realize, hey, we can just vaccinate this livestock to stop the transmission of tuberculosis, but let's keep the pasteurization?
So actually there isn't, if I remember correctly, there actually isn't a vaccination against TB. It's the brucellosis that they do have the vaccination for, the Bangs vaccination. Which also, brucellosis also lives in the ground too. And a lot of times, unfortunately, if you have a herd that has brucellosis, if I remember correctly, the state of Idaho actually wants you to condemn those animals, just because it does spread. It will spread rapidly, and it lives in the ground for years.
Gotcha.
So that's
so
also...
the tuberculosis, then the work you do with the tuberculosis on your animals is not that you're necessarily vaccinated, or excuse me, it's not explicitly that you're vaccinating them, but it's that you're consistently checking.
Yes.
And how frequently do you check for
It's a yearly check.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's just a yearly check that they do with the certified vet to be able to make sure that that cow is not carrying tuberculosis. The vet, because I've asked him too, I said, have you ever actually seen a reaction for tuberculosis? And he's been doing this for 30 years. And he said he's never seen it, but it is just a requirement because it is an active, like it's not eradicated. It still does live.
Right.
And so most of where people who get TB, they find that it comes from milk is what it basically boils down to it.
Right. And again, that's not a large number of people. Like we don't have TB outbreaks.
Not like it used to. Yeah, no.
Right. Right. Okay. So bottom line is, at some point they're developed a test where they're like, okay, we can test annually or every 6 months or every month. Doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
Like you test often enough that there's some level of confidence that the consumer can say, okay, this does not have tuberculosis, but we kept the pasteurization process.
Yes.
Was that in part because it was far more convenient to transport, to store? Like what was it that, like, why keep that once you're like, okay, but we can address this problem in a different way? I'm trying to figure out, like, people now, there are a lot of things that my eyes have been open to since I moved to this state, and God bless it all, right?
Yeah.
But part of trying to understand is like, why did we get to this point in other places? Like, why did these things become vilified? Why is this such a, like, for instance, Idaho has a fantastic homeschool protection system. And a lot of people homeschool their kids, and you don't see like just droves of uneducated, crazy people that it's like, oh, it's the homeschool. It's like, that doesn't exist, right?
Unlike the raw milk that everybody is.
Right, where everyone's dying, or like I sent you that video actually when we were planning this out. You have this raw milk supplier who people were willingly, purchasing from this supplier that was, very clearly articulating this is raw milk. There are risks involved here, whatever. And then you just have these agents that are like, throw $70,000 worth of product away. Yeah. Like, here we go. And they just sit there and they're like,
well, and what's funny is I think I read some comments on that video that people were like, that's not $70,000 worth of product. If you think about it, it is. It's a lot. I mean, I sell my half gallons for $6, and that is basically borderlining on me making somewhat of a profit, but most of it is going back to feed my cows. So
right.
It is a lot of money to be able to invest into the feed to make the milk production.
Right. Even if it's not $70,000 worth of profit, it's $70,000 worth of product. That's a different
that goes
question.
Back into those cows. To be able to continue what they're doing.
Right. So like what was it that continued to push the sentiment that's like, raw milk is bad, we need to protect you from your own decision-making process? Like, alcohol is bad.
Yes.
Like 100,000 people die a year from like alcohol. Like, I don't want to say vodka specific, but like you can go to the store and buy vodka. You can go to the store and buy Jack Daniels all day long. Like, great. Awesome. That's dangerous. You can also buy cigarettes. We can, drive fast cars. We can engage in these things, but the vilification of something like raw milk, it's like, this doesn't compute because you don't have, like hundreds of thousands of deaths annually from raw milk. So like, what happened once people realized, okay, we have this pasteurization process, but we can also just treat the animals or check the animals in this other way, and that should sufficiently protect consumers. But they're like, no, let's stick with the pasteurization.
I mean, a lot of what the bottom line is the hygiene handling of all your equipment, making sure it's all clean, making sure your cow's clean, not just tested, but clean. Like there's nothing on the other, that would be basically bottom line of it, is like the bacteria that could possibly be in the milk.
You have to take greater care of the cleanliness, hygiene, and everything of the animal.
Yeah, I sanitize my equipment like you would not believe. I mean, my hands when I'm milking, they get so dry from all of the solutions I use to clean. my tank, my claws, which is what you put onto the cow to be able to milk, the cups, that is basically what actually connects to.
Sure.
All of the tubing. My parlor floor is always constantly clean. I spray down to make sure flies are not flying around everywhere. And then that's just talking about my equipment. And then my cow is a completely different story. Cow process when it comes to milking is in the summertime, it's a little bit easier because what I do is I actually will hose off her udder first. Just to try to get everything a little bit loose. So that way, because the cows are all pasture, so they're not in a dry lot. So they're a little bit cleaner. But that still doesn't mean I don't lack on my cleaning of them. But I will spray the udder down first to try to make sure that I can get anything loose to get it off. I brush off the udder after it's dried off to make sure dust, dirt, whatever comes off. And then starts the process of the actual cleaning them.
This is like the 2-bucket car wash method, where it's like your first bucket doesn't have, like, you have to hose it off and just use the mechanical nature of the water to like get off things. Yeah. So like if you go straight to the second bucket with soap, you're just going to rub the dirt into the car, right? So it's
pretty
like,
much,
yeah. So like you have to clean it off with water and mechanically remove as much as you can before you go to the chemical sanitation.
And that's just how I do it. I mean, other places have different ways that they do it. This is just how I do it because this is kind of how I was taught to do it. So when I actually go to clean her, I actually will dip in what's called a gentle iodine solution. So it won't actually hurt her, but it will kill everything off of it. So I let that do work for a couple of minutes. And then what I'll do is I'll take sanitized teat wipes. So these are the cleanest wipes you can find. I will take them and wipe off each individual teat with a single wipe. So I don't actually use the same wipe on another teat. So even there, I still, I'm very careful about how I sanitize. And then after that is all done, I will make sure that everything, like there's no iodine coming back off on the wipes. I'll go through probably about a dozen wipes on one cow just to make sure that cow is fully clean. And then afterwards, and also while we're doing all this, I use gloves too. So I'm making sure that my hands are not contaminated. I'm not contaminating the cow because, believe it or not, we can actually give diseases back to those cows.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
So we actually wear gloves when we're working with them.
And we give diseases to each other. That's why you go to Chipotle and they're wearing gloves.
Right.
Like, don't handle my stuff with your bare hands, you monkey.
Yeah. And so that's basically what I do is I have, the gloves on and I'm working. And so after I've gotten done with the iodine solution and making sure she's clean, I will actually do what is called test strips. So I will go to each individual teat, and it serves two processes. Basically, it's to make sure that I get all of the iodine that could have gone up into the teat canal to come out, so it's not contaminating the milk. The other thing is to make sure that there's no clumps, nothing that's in the milk, because it'll spray onto the floor, and I can see like if there's anything that doesn't look right. And so then I will actually do that to each individual teat about, probably 4 or 5 times, just to make sure that she's fully clean. There's nothing wrong. How I will also tell people is I'll say, my cows are so clean, you can actually go up to her and literally drink from her. Like, that is, if I don't feel like my cow is that clean, I won't sell the milk from that collection. Just because that is my OCD with handling my cows.
Yeah, I can tell you from the episode of Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe that I did see where he was dealing with the dairy. They had the cows on like this giant revolving circle thing.
Rotary,
right? Yeah, exactly. And they would go through with like a flamethrower, like torch the. And I don't know all the nuances of what they were doing.
If it was the fire, it was probably torching the hairs off of the udder. So it's not actually burning the cow. It's singeing the hairs off, so that, because hairs will collect bacteria. Yeah. It's gross to even think about it because of the amount of hair that a single person's body has. Right. But hair will contain bacteria, and so that's basically what they're doing is they're singeing the hair off of the udder, so that way it is as clean as it can be. Right.
But that was pretty close to the end of the process before it. Yeah. Just like, so again, what I'm getting at is your process of sterilization and care with making sure that the product that comes out of the cow is literally something you can drink directly from. Yep. Varies drastically from the episode of, Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe that I saw where they're like, look, let's just get the milk out and then we're going to torch it we'll pasteurize it. So we don't, the process of sterilization just necessarily does not have to be as rigorous and significant.
Yeah. Cause they do go through the pasteurization. So, that's where I was talking about how like the dairy farms, they are heavily regulated with a lot of their stuff versus me, where I'm, my requirements for the state of, XYZ. But dairy, they still have to go through their whole hygiene. They still have to make sure their equipment is all clean.
Sure.
Because dairies like that actually go through, I believe it's either a monthly test. I think it depends on the size of the dairy that they will send out like an agent from the USDA or the ISDA to go and test their equipment to make sure that it is clean. I actually do have a friend of mine that she's out in Emmett, which is where I got most of my jerseys from. She runs, I think it's between 80 and 90 head of Jersey cows that she milks. And she's been doing this for a long time. They started out in Meridian and then they eventually moved out to Emmett. She kind of has gone through with me of like all the stuff that they do. And one of the things that when the milk goes for collecting, the driver will actually test the milk before it even enters their tank. And if it comes up with any, because the biggest thing that everybody argues is that we put vaccinations in our cows and it goes into the milk. That is not true. That is not true. I don't even do that.
And when you say we, like, what's the we that we're talking? When you're saying we don't do that,
us is the owners of the cattle, the milker. I mean,
and is that as somebody who's selling raw milk, or is that the dairy industry in general?
Just in general.
Okay. Okay, great.
Because if we are taking care of our cows properly and we're not a holistic, because there are some people out there that they don't believe in feeding grain, they don't believe in doing any vaccinations or anything like that. What we do is if we give a vaccination for, say, for example, like in the summertime, we have pink eye that goes around like crazy because of the flies. My course of action that I always do is I will wash out the eye with what is called Vetericyn pink eye wash. I patch the eye so that way it kind of stays with that cow and the flies are not transmitting it to the other cows. And then I will give a shot of LA-200. Which is an antibacterial, is basically what it does. And when I give a cow, which I hate having to give any type of vaccination for that, but my cow's livelihood is more important than me making money off of them. So when I give the vaccination, I think it's a 3-day withdrawal. So basically I still have to milk her because obviously if I don't milk her, she's going to be uncomfortable, but I still have to milk her, but I have to dump that milk or feed it to the calves, whichever works, because it has that withdrawal period. So, and that just kind of goes across the board with not just me, who is just, this little guy that does it, but it's also with all the other dairies. We all keep records of everything. And the big dairies, they have a different way of keeping check of everything. But if they have a cow that comes into the parlor and registers that they were vaccinated with something that has a withdrawal time, then they will actually not really pull the cow, but they'll still milk it, but they will dump that milk so it doesn't go into the tank. And the problem is that if any of that milk actually goes into the tank, all of that whole tank has to be dumped. And most of these guys that have tanks are, gallons and gallons of milk, and the whole thing has to be tanked or has to be dumped. And then it has to go through a cleaning process, and then it has to be sanitized.
It screws up the whole thing.
Gotcha. What is that saying of never cry over spilled milk? It's it is a saying. Yeah. And so
so the milk gets tested before it even goes into the distribution container.
Yeah, before it even hits the truck tank. So where it's all collected is into the bulk tank, which is what they call it. The truck driver who has the transportation tank, he will actually personally test the milk in the bulk tank before he actually starts pulling it into the other tank. Because the friend that's out in Emmett, she has I think 1,000 or 1,500 gallon tank is what hers is. And when hers gets collected, which I think is twice a week, hers gets collected also with another dairy that's close by. So they actually they do a split basically. And all of that milk goes to Dairy Gold, if I remember correctly. So the driver has to be very careful when he's testing, because it also gets tested when it goes to the factory to make sure. So there's a lot of protocol that they do for not just, raw milk like I do, but also just milk in general.
Yeah. Conventional milk processes.
Yeah.
Like we consume so much of it.
Oh yeah.
It's in so many different products. I'm actually allergic to milk myself.
Oh, that's
But I have heard that what are your thoughts on A2 versus A1 milk, right? Because everybody tells me, they're like, listen, I have a friend, he's lactose intolerant. He pigs out on A2 milk, right? Like this is the overwhelming sentiment that it's like, if you get A2 milk, you'd be good. And I am too chicken to try because the consequences, if they're wrong, are dire.
Oh, I believe it. I have my brother-in-law that he is so lactose intolerant, he can't even have croutons. Croutons, yeah.
With like Parmesan cheese on them or something?
No, just buttered. I mean, if they're like buttered and baked. I felt so bad because one time we went to lunch at this place. No, it was this horse show. Okay. And we went and had lunch, and he had their burger, no cheese, no nothing. Completely forgot that they butter their buns when they go to, and he started feeling, I felt so bad, but that's how lactose intolerant he is. And I'm still trying to work him into trying some of my cow's milk, just because, not because I want to use him as a guinea pig.
Sure.
But I have had multiple people where they have gone from drinking grocery store milk into drinking the milk that I sell, and they don't have any problems. They don't have any upset or digestive issues anymore. And I keep trying to convince them, like, hey, just try a little bit of it.
Give it a shot, baby.
Just see if it will help.
I'd be scared. And are your cows A2 or A1?
So I have not actually tested all of them. I do suspect that from the breeder I got them from, that I do have a couple that are A2 positive.
Okay, so explain this to me, because somebody just told me, A2 versus A1. I think it was my dog trainer, Seth Simpson. He was saying that, like, hey, the standard cow that you get milk from is an A1 cow, but there are these other cows that are A2 cows. That's the extent of my knowledge. And then I do know at Costco, there's like a purple maroonish container that has A2 milk.
Yeah. And it's expensive too.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. So like, what is it? Is it like blood type essentially, but like with milk? I mean, how do you become A1 versus A2?
It kind of is, because A1 and A2 actually is genetically bred. So we can actually be, and a lot of people are actually starting to breed A2 and A2 cows and bulls. So that way offspring come out as A2 carriers too. It's what it is in the milk, the lactose is different. And so it helps with the digestion versus the A1. So I've never really dove completely into it because I've just never.
Sure, it's not necessarily your jam. You're more of, hey, let's produce really, really good raw milk.
Pretty much,
I'm not as worried about A1 versus A2.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so, I mean, I do have some people that they are starting to question me if I do have A1 or A2 carriers. So I might send off, which is basically just tail hairs that I collect, give the animal description, and send it down to UC Davis, and they will test to see if the cow is A1 or A2.
My dad went to UC Davis. So did two of my sisters and a brother-in-law. Go Aggies.
There you go. Yeah. Well, I send most of my testing down there is basically where it goes. So I basically just have to pull hairs, send the identification for the cow, and then they test it, and they'll give me the results back. I just got to basically just kind of figure out if I want to do my whole herd and test them, or if I want to just kind of go as I go. Because I do have some people that are actually interested on just taking A2 milk instead of A1 milk. And some people are like, I don't care. It tastes delicious. So, I mean, but I do have some people that they are interested in the A2 because of that lactose that they feel like it does better for their system. Gotcha.
So another question. Okay. Understood on the pasteurization, understood that the bottom line is, it's an increased cost. There's increased risk if you don't invest the time and energy. It sounds like you're like the gold standard.
I try to be.
Each teat is iodine and poop free and the whole thing. But there are also, and again, I don't know, which is why I'm asking you, I have heard many stories about these mass health benefits to consuming raw milk. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, likely if you have them, they'll likely be anecdotal without, like, I'm not going to hold you to that this is like a study in Science magazine or something, but what do people generally experience, or have they reported anything? It's like, oh, this has really helped me in this area or this area. Because like the gut biome is something that, I mean, it really came into popularity to start talking about gut biome like 10 or 15 years ago, where people started realizing like, hey, your gut is communicating, like it has a separate nervous system, like it has all these different, you can change your gut bacteria. You see this
like
very
yogurt and stuff like that. Right. Yeah.
You see this very quickly. Also when people start doing like the carnivore diet, right?
Yes.
People report like in the first week, they're dying for a loaf of bread. And then by the end of the first week, they're like, oh, I don't really care. It's like the gut biome is changing your desires for different things as your gut biome itself changes. And, you know, obviously the propensity to prescribe antibiotics and how that screws things up, people just became more aware of it.
Yeah.
And as such, things that affected it, like raw milk, also kind of came into view, which is, wait, how is this raw milk affecting, modifying, enhancing my gut biome?
It's just basically that good bacteria that is left in it from it being raw milk instead of it being cooked out of the raw milk during the pasteurization. So a lot of times you kind of just think of it as, you know, because yogurt is good for you. It's good for helping your gut move. And it's kind of the same thing with raw milk. That good bacteria that's in it will help with a lot of the gut environment is basically what it is. I mean, and it's just like some people have reported that using raw milk for yogurt making is completely different than using just like grocery milk. Just because it one just tastes better, but two, they feel like it works better for them because of that whole process. I mean, because we do cook up our yogurt to, I don't believe it's 180. I believe it's something around like 140 or something. And then cool it back down and then add the, because you always have to, it's kind of like sourdough. You always have to add another
kick.
Well, like a previous yogurt, basically. So all of the, what is it? It's not bacteria. It's the probios, because probios are living. So they have to like take from an old one and put it in the new one while you're making it. So that's basically how they do for, raw milk yogurt is basically that type of a process.
Sure.
I have one gal that she actually makes raw kefir out of it. And she says that when she has raw kefir, that is the best thing, and she never has any problems with her stomach whatsoever. So she loves when I have my cows in raw or in milk, because she'll spend the whole time just making raw kefir. And I've never had kefir, but I've heard it's really good.
I've never had it either.
I have no idea.
I don't know. I'm not very adventurous when it comes to things
dairy
like that.
products.
Like I will mess around with, like I love sushi. I went through, I had this hot phase. I was an impressionable young man, and I had this hot moment when I was, I think I was 20. I was 20 years old, and I was walking across campus. I was going to Berkeley. Don't love Berkeley. And again, I'm like walking across campus in the summer. There's this dude doing some kind of like thing, whatever.
Yeah.
And I struck up a conversation with him, just like middle of summer. I have nothing else going on. And he's eating raw beef. And I'm like, what's that? And so this guy, Mo, convinces me that like raw beef is the answer to all of my problems. Like, you got a bad grade, raw beef, right? Boom, here you go. Matt, being the impressionable idiot he is, I'm like, that sounds right. I don't know why, but that sounds right. It's not more studying. It's the raw beef. It'll be in my head. I don't know. It's something. So I started eating this raw beef, right?
Yeah.
And so there was this place called Berkeley Bowl, which was, like the OG Whole Foods that got this really high quality. So I go get this cross rib roast. It's like this gigantic thing. And I cut it up and I eat it for 2 weeks. And it was fantastic until I threw up raw beef when I was working out.
No.
That was bad. But the point is, like, I'm an adventurous, consumer of foods. I just don't mess around with like fermented, dairy stuff. It's not my jam.
No, I don't blame you. I mean, it can be bad for you if it's not handled properly, or if someone doesn't know what they're doing.
I'm not even talking about that. I trust everything you do is sterilized. I'm not like I have a family member who gets like a 5-gallon bucket and ferments cabbage for her gut and stuff. Gosh. I'm like, I'm not touching any of that.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm necessarily going to get sick in the classic sense of like a virus. I'm just not messing around with that. Like, this is working just fine. I don't need the bucket cabbage.
Yeah. No, I mean, and a lot of what I feel like the problem is nowadays is that um, because more people are getting informed of not just like raw dairy, but like we were talking, like raw honey. Anything with the word raw, except for fish, obviously, kind of stay away from that. If it's a
Right.
sketchy, don't do, what is it, gas station sushi.
Dude,
I
there
mean,
was an all-you-can-eat sushi place in Berkeley that I
oh
frequented when I
no.
was 22. Again, Matt was an adventurous, impressionable guy. It doesn't matter. Keep going.
But I feel like it's become, that kind of a conversation between people of there is no middle ground with it. People are just like, it's either wrong to do it or it's either right to do it. And I feel
Right.
like a lot of times, and I hate saying it, but I feel like the government has a hand in that. And because if you think about like what is healthy for us as consumers anymore is what we can get directly from farmers. Like, I don't know if you've seen like those videos of like the plastic watermelon that's been going around,
Mm.
if that was grown from local farmers, it'd be a completely different story. I mean, because not only do we also,
Wait, what's a plastic watermelon?
you haven't seen those videos? Yeah,
No.
it's like these people that are going and they're opening up watermelon and they're like trying to bend it like this, and it's not snapping, it's just like bending.
Okay. That's not good.
And then like plastic avocado. I mean, it's, oh yeah, all over TikTok and Instagram. I've been seeing these
See, don't
videos.
mess with TikTok. The Chinese are just watching everything.
Oh, I
They're the
hear
ones
about
that are
that.
coming for your milk.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But no, I feel like if more people just locally sourced, because like not only do we also do raw milk, but we used to do beef. So I have 2 beef cows left. Kind of backstory is we were raising beef cows for a long time. I took over the herd from my mom and dad because they just wanted to get out of it. They didn't want to do it anymore. So I took over the beef herd. We raised up quite a few steers up for butcher. And unless you're like a big name, like some of the ones that are around here, people are more inclined to buy from the big names instead of like a little guy like me. And so when I was doing that, I had my 2 milk cows and I was selling the excess milk that I was getting. And I was seeing more value and profit in the milk
From the milk,
cows
yeah.
than I was from my beef cows. So the way I kind of looked at it as, well, I have my great grandpa's parlor, I have all the equipment, I have all the knowledge from everything. I might as well just run with this and just kind of sell off my beef cows and invest into my dairy cows. So that's basically how I ended up with 7 milk cows.
God, that's awesome. So your great grandfather was a dairy person as well?
He was, yeah. He so the brand that I have, which is the SP, when my husband Matt and I were talking about coming up with a brand because we needed to start branding our cattle. There's too many cattle thefts going on. I told him, I said, well, we can do an S. And he goes, well, that's too plain. We need to do something else. And I go, well, I have no idea what we're going to do. And he goes, well, what about if you incorporate Cecil's name, which was my great grandpa, and his last name was Post, Pfost. And so the reason why we did that is because the farm that we do is his farm that he'd bought back in the 60s. So we are, oh my gosh, my husband, we are the 4th generation to own this farm. So it's been in the family since the 60s. My great grandpa started milking 20 head of jerseys on the same place. Like I think 61 is when he started. And as he got older, he just kind of got to the point where he couldn't do it anymore. So he basically shut everything off, didn't sell any of the equipment, got rid of the jerseys, and bought Angus. And then he just started doing Angus. So my whole life I've been raised on Angus beef. I've never really known what a store-bought beef is. So I kind of like
My mouth is watering right now.
I kind of like to be able to brag about
Yeah.
that. But yeah, so the parlor was still there. My great aunt, she decided to kind of turn it into a storage unit. So last year, my husband and I, we went through that whole entire parlor because it's a 7-head stanchion. We went through that whole entire parlor. In 32 years I've been alive, I've never seen this parlor empty. I've never even seen like what it actually looked like. My mom said the last time she's seen it was probably when she was about 8, and
Wow.
she's in her 60s now. Otherwise it's been just a storage unit. So Matt and I, we went through and cleaned up the whole thing. We took out, I believe, our stock trailer, which is an 18-footer of trash, just
Junk.
it was just stuff that had been thrown in there. And so we took all of that out. I didn't want to completely take the parlor from her storage place, so we left the first part of it where the cows don't come in, of her being able to keep it there. And then we cleaned up like where the slider gate is to be able to bring the cows in. But like the Condi milking machine, which is, it hadn't been ran in 40 years. We were able to refurbish it. My husband refurbished it. He took it down to one of the milking places in Caldwell over off of Simplot Boulevard. They kind of showed him like what to do and everything. They fixed the wiring on it, and we got it running. We cranked it, and it moved, so it was still working. I still use it to milk.
Wild. So wild.
And then we still have the Surge belly milkers, which those are like the old school style. Of what they did is it had one giant leather strap that went over the back of the cow, and it hooked up onto like this, it was like a bucket, and it had an arm on it, and you hook the arm onto that leather strap, and then it has the suction cups that come up to the cow, and that's what it milked, and so they were called belly milkers. We still have all the old equipment for that. Not only that, but we also still have the old milk cans. Like the old original gold-lined milk cans. There's, I think, 12 or 13 of them still in the parlor.
Do you use those?
No.
I was going to say, like, that must be so cool.
We could clean them and use them, but there's no purpose of them because nowadays there's better equipment to use to be able to use for storage. But yeah, so we still have the old original milk cans and everything from my great-grandpa when he milked. Yeah, I wish he was around just so, because some of the stuff that I know I could learn from him, I wish I could sit down and just talk to him and kind of be like, well, how did you do this? And how did you do that? You know, but I'm just grateful that he kind of just left everything and was maybe, I don't know, maybe another generation might show up and decide to milk again. So It's funny because I always joke with people that the ranch started as milking, went to beef, and now we're going back to milking again because it's more valuable market for me because, again, I have the knowledge and I have the equipment to be able to do it. And there's multiple other meat source sellers out there between like, I have my friend the Jensen's that they do out of San Hollow. There's McIntyre's, there's Thomas Cattle Company, Hat Brand Beef. I mean, there's so many different distributors of beef around here that it's little fish, big ocean.
Yeah, sure.
But there's not very many milk sellers as far as raw milk. I've even had a couple of friends that are in dairies that are like, I've even thought about going back to raw milk cells because there's more in it.
Yeah, right.
It's just like another thing that probably doesn't get discussed is that another restriction that big dairies have on them is they are only allowed to produce X amount of milk a month. If they go over that production, they're fined.
Oh.
They're fined for having too much milk production.
Is that a function of trying to stop monopolies from developing?
I honestly don't know what the background is with it. I just know that with the big dairies, they are expected a quota is basically what they are. And if they go over it, they're fined. And if they go under it, they're not paid. So it's like kind of like one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't. So a friend of mine that I've known through 4-H and stuff, her family has done, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember. I think they do about an 800 head dairy is what theirs is. And I was asking her at one point if she had any Holstein heifers for sale that I just wanted to buy one or two. And she told me that they actually don't outsell because they breed every year to make sure that they have the right amount of replacements to be able to cover the cull cows that they have to do so that their herd is constantly the same. And I was flabbergasted by that because I was like, well, you can't fluctuate at all. And she goes, we maybe do one or two of, over under.
Right.
And it's because of that fine that they get if they overproduce. Because they, if I remember correctly, they don't do any of the weighing because milk is sold by weight, believe it or not.
Interesting.
So it's actually sold by weight, not by gallon. And if they go over a certain weight, then they get fined for that. And again, milk is also weighed differently because like a gallon of Jersey milk weighs like 8.67 pounds, I think is what it is. But a gallon of Holstein milk will be different because it's not as heavily fat.
Gotcha.
So it kind of difference between that. But yeah, that's something that does not get discussed very much. Of these dairies get fined if they overproduce milk.
Gotcha.
Which you wouldn't think would make sense.
No, but I mean, look, a lot of things don't make sense.
I know, right?
Listen, where can people get your milk?
So basically right now, I sell all of my milk over at Rustic Oven in Middleton. Amanda was actually a customer of mine when I first started literally meeting people to sell the milk. And so they have delicious food over there. They do a lot of like sweets. They do cookies. They do homemade Pop-Tarts over there. Cinnamon rolls are to die for. I love their cinnamon rolls and their orange rolls that they have. And she's actually told me a couple times they've had people that would come in for morning greet and will buy the milk just to get the cream off, to do their coffee and have a cinnamon roll in their bakery. So
God, that's awesome.
It's pretty cool. One of the things I think I found out while I was doing some research of, because I was trying to see like what states do not allow any type of milk sales, what states do allow for either human or pet consumption. And one of the things that I read in this was Idaho allows for restaurant sales. So I'm trying to see if I could I need to talk to ISDA to confirm to make sure before I get in trouble, about just doing like single serve for raw milk for them to be able to sell at Rustic Oven for if anybody wants like some milk to have with their cinnamon rolls.
Right, just a little.
Yeah, and so because from what I remember when I first applied for my permit is that basically the quantity has to be on the product. So it has to be, doesn't matter how much it is. If it's 8 ounces of milk, if it's, 64 ounces, it just has to have it. So I'm almost thinking that maybe I could do the single servings of, milk to be able to, if little kids want to have it with their sandwiches when they're there, something like that. And she could be able to do that. But it's one of those things I have to check with the ISDA because the other thing is that when I do a new label, I also have to send it to them to make sure that they approve the label first.
Right.
So
you want to be in compliance. There's no reason to rush anything.
Yeah. Because if they find you breaking any of the rules, then your permit gets nixed and then it's a heck of a headache trying to get it back. So,
as you grow, would you consider doing delivery things or having like a hub for deliveries? There's a gal in my neighborhood who has a refrigerator, I believe, that she distributes goat milk in.
Oh.
So the provider of the goat milk or the producer comes and drops off the goat milk in her hub,
like kind of like a checkpoint.
Yeah, and then people can check in and grab it.
I mean, eventually I probably will once I start really getting my herd going, because I did invest in the Holstein so that way I can have more milk, but to mix it with the Jersey so it's still a little creamy. But yeah, I've definitely thought about if I need to branch out, more this way instead of that way. Yeah, that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, because McIntyre Farms comes and just like we put a cooler out on our doorstep last night, and sometime between 3 and 6 a.m. they came and filled it up, and it was like, oh my God, the carcass fairies showed up, and there's like this dead animal. Awesome, let's eat.
Right? Yeah. No, I used to, when I was selling milk, I actually used to meet people. So I would do Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays of have people meet me in Middleton, and I would bring coolers full of milk, and that was great until I started having flaky people.
Yeah, right.
And at that time I was actually doing all my collections in jars, so like glass jars. And I would do deposits on them to make sure that I would get the jars back. And like I said, the thing I had was like the flaky people that they would be like, oh, we'll show up, we'll get 2 gallons. So I would have extra milk, and that was milk that I'd have to bring back. And so it just got to the point where it was becoming like a headache to meet people.
Yeah.
And then last year, Amanda had actually come forth and she was like, hey, can you sell in stores? And I go, yeah, actually I can. She goes, I will give you 3 shelves if you can give milk. And so one time this is how big of a producer my cow is. Clover, where she produces the 9 gallons, last year I was bringing in the jars, and they have this giant, I don't even know how big it is. It's like a probably about almost an 18-foot table that they do like a lot of their bread stuff on. And luckily I had come in when they weren't doing anything, because I had to rearrange some of the milk in the fridge. I filled up that whole table of milk. I took a picture of it because the girls that were there were just like, "Oh my gosh, how many cows are you milking?" I said, "This is just from one." And they were like, "Oh my God." Like, "What do you do with all that milk?" I said, "Well, you guys sell it for me."
Yeah, right.
So
What do you think I'm doing with it?
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
if I get any excess, I honestly would either like feed it to my chickens, or when we have pigs, I feed it to the pigs.
Sure.
Right now I have a bottle calf, so he only gets a gallon a day, so he's not getting very much. And so that's kind of, what I do with excess milk. Honestly, some people actually, believe it or not, put it in their gardens for the extra calcium, like for their tomatoes and stuff. So if I normally have like excess milk that I feel like should not be on the shelves, then I have even some people that they're like, "Hey, I constantly I'm looking for milk, so if you need to get rid of it, I'll be happy to take it off your hands." And so I'm never in short supply of where my milk goes, which is great.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be way worse. I could have like 3 fridges full of milk that it just is not selling. So
Yeah, that'd be a waste.
yeah.
That'd be bad. Well, listen, thank you for what you're doing. It's wonderful to have local suppliers that are just supplying things that people can enjoy if they want to. But having those options, and having local sources of those options, it's a huge thing. I was just meeting with the Fair Idaho executive director, and again, it's all about bringing local people together, providers from farm all the way to the table. In a real manner, like in a manner that supports us. Not there are these horror show or stories about, for instance, the nature of farmers markets down in my previous state, whereas these people were not the farmers at all. Like, these giant trucks would deliver this produce to them, and then they would portray them as like these, humble servants of the community that are supplying this stuff. It's like, that's a total lie. Yeah, right. And again, we don't have that, right? Like, we have actual people, which I think is awesome. And that it doesn't mean people won't try to be slimy, but it's wonderful to meet and actually talk to people about what the process is and what they're actually do. So not only do people become more comfortable with it, but they know that they have a source if they want.
Yeah, and they know where it's coming from.
Right.
I mean, and most of us, I'm not just, including myself, but even just farmers out there, are more than happy to talk to people. I mean, if people have questions like, "Hey, how do you grow your corn?" or, what goes into your fruit orchards, anything like that, people are going to say.
Right.
I mean, and that, I think, is what a lot of people don't realize, is that if you have questions about where your food comes, ask.
Right.
I mean, it's, we're not going to bite your heads off. I mean, like I said, I'm an open book when it comes to, if people want to come and see how I milk, I'm, here's the time, I'll be right here.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to hide anything from people, because I want them to be comfortable with what they are drinking or what they are eating. Because I don't want that like fear mongering of miscommunication or misunderstanding that a lot of people are now trying to put out there on social media of, it's taboo. Don't drink the raw milk. Don't eat the raw honey, stuff like that. When it's actually the most healthiest food that you can get, because it's the most natural. There's no additives to it. There's nothing that's been done to it. It is basically how it has been intended.
Right. It is, in fact, how people have survived for thousands of years.
Exactly.
I mean, the FDA.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of that has to deal with, the government trying to ban a lot of stuff. Like, there are so many states out there that they do not allow for any type of raw milk sales, whether it's for people, human consumption, or even pet consumption. There are states out there that they do allow for pet consumption, but if you are caught selling for human consumption, you're automatically no more. And there's actually one place that I was researching, I think it's Massachusetts, that they allow for human consumption, but it is based off of their local governments, and I don't know if that's city governments or if that's county governments, but apparently each one regulates like how the milk is sold, like probably different rules on what they have to put on their labels or something like that. And there is like further testing that people do to test the milk to make sure that they're not carrying any other pathogens that shouldn't be in there. Some people test very regularly, like once a month. Some people test, every 4 months, quarterly. They test their milk just to make sure that there's nothing in it. And honestly, as long as like no one is getting sick off of it, you should just keep going as you're doing. I have, knock on wood, I have yet to have anybody that tells me that their milk that they bought has just absolutely made them sick. Like they couldn't get up for 5 days, that type of a thing. So,
Sure.
Actually, I've had a lot of people actually say the opposite, that they've had better reactions for a lot of things.
I'm
so.
sure. And you have to give people individual agency.
Yes.
I've definitely taken risks with meat that's been in the fridge too long. But,
I think we all have with chicken.
Yeah, right. That one's on me. Anyway, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for coming in. Rustic Oven is where they can get your milk?
Okay. Rustic Oven in Middleton, not to be confused with Rustic Table in Star.
Not to be confused.
Yes.
That'd be a weird one. Anyway, thank you for coming in. We'll do it again.
Of course.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.